So the next video we're going to go through in Unit 3C is going to be opposites and absolute value. So our learning objective today is to know what the opposite of a number is and also how to find the absolute value of a number. Now, we have already talked about the opposite of a number earlier this year, so it is something that we can go through pretty quickly. And we're going to see how it kind of relates to the absolute value and how it's similar in a way in what we're thinking of. It's not exactly the same, but it does have similar concepts. And we'll discuss that in a moment. All right, so we already talked about opposite numbers, and opposite numbers are numbers that are the same distance away from zero. So these numbers are the same distance away from zero, or you can think of it as they're in opposite positions on the number line. So they're like the direct reflection of each other. But the way that we always refer to it as is they're the same distance away from zero. So if I ask you to find the opposite of 4, the first thing you need to think about then is, okay, well, how far away is 4 on a number line? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we're at 4, we are 1, 2, 3, 4 away from 0 on our number line. So that means in order for us to find the opposite, we need to go to the other side of our number line. So on the other side of 0, meaning if we were positive, we're now going to move to the negative numbers, and we're going to go 4 units away from 0 because we were 4 units away this time. So it's 1, -1, -2, -3, and -4. So we know that this is going to then be our opposite of positive 4 is a -4. Right? And nothing changes when we're doing this with the -8, just because now we're dealing with and starting with a negative number, we're going to look. So I'm going to count by 2's in this one. So it'll be -8, -6, -4, -2, and then 2, 4, 6, 8. So when we're doing this one, we can say, okay, what is the opposite of -8? Well, now we're starting at -8, and we see, okay, well, how far away from 0 are we from -8? So 2, 4, 6, 8. We're 8 units away from 0. So that means to get the opposite of -8, I need to go 8 units on the other side of 0. Since I started in negatives, I'm going to go to positive. So it would be 2, 4, 6, 8. So the opposite of -8 is a +8. So you can see when we're taking the opposite, we're just taking the opposite sign of it. If it was positive, it's now going to be negative. If it was negative, it's now going to be positive. All right, so we're taking the opposite sign. So it's telling us that we're just looking at the number that's on the opposite side of 0 on that number line that has the exact same value. So if we start it as a positive number like we did here, then our answer is going to be the -4. If we start it as a negative number like we did here, our answer will be that +8. All right, I'm going to pause the video for a second and create a number line for this last one. All right, now this one's a little bit different because we're seeing the opposite of 7. So we're starting with the number 7 because that's the number that they give us. So I'm starting here. So we had to do the opposite twice. So that means I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm 7 units away. So the first opposite here is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units away in the other direction. So this is now going to give me an answer of -7. However, we still need to take the opposite again because there's 2 times we had to do that. So now to find the final answer, I need to go back and say, okay, well, what's the opposite now of -7? Because that's what we're looking to do now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's 7 units away. So now we're going to go 7 units in the other direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means we're going back to that +7. All right, because what we can think about it is when we're doing this answer, we can say, okay, the opposite of the opposite. Well, the first opposite of 7 is going to give me -7. And then when I go to the second opposite, the opposite of -7 is going to give me a +7. So you see we're moving back to how we started. We started at 7. We're going to -7 to begin with. And then the opposite of -7 is bringing us back to the beginning. All right, so what if I gave you a problem that says, all right, so the opposite of the opposite of the opposite of the opposite, the opposite of -12. So what we need to do then is we need to start with this -12, and we're just going to work down the line and say, okay, well, what is the opposite of -12? Well, the opposite of -12 is +12, so I know that's my answer. So for that first one. So then when I move to the next opposite, well, what is the opposite of 12? Well, the opposite of 12 is -12. So then when I move to the next one, well, what's the opposite of -12? Is going to be a +12. When I move to another one, well, what's the opposite of +12? Well, the opposite of +12 is -12. And when I move to the final opposite, what is the opposite of -12? It is a +12. All right, this concept is really important for you to understand because when we learn how to multiply, I mean, we already did, but what we do next year when you are multiplying by negative numbers, you're going to see that we can represent the opposite through a negative number. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opposites, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have the negative 12 here. So we can actually represent this as a multiplication of negative 1. So when you guys are learning how to multiply, or when you guys are solidifying your knowledge of multiplying negative numbers, we can think about why a negative times a negative or a negative times a positive gives us a certain sign by thinking about and using these opposites. All right, so now we're going to go into the absolute value. All right, and you'll see the reason why the absolute value is similar to what we just did is that the absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0. So in the other one, we were talking about that the opposite, we're finding the numbers that are the same distance from 0. Here we're just saying, well, how far away is this number from 0? And the way that you denote it, or the way that we can show the absolute value, is by those two straight lines next to the number. So if I say the absolute value of 5, it's written like this. These bars let us know that that is the absolute value. And now let's think about this for a second. Distance. Can distance ever be negative? Like if you ever called up your friend and you're walking to their house and they said, well, how far away are you? Would you ever say I'm negative 8 blocks away or negative a kilometer away? No, we never refer to distance in negative. In physics, you'll learn something with negative numbers, which is telling us which direction we're going. But for us here in math, when we talk about distance, it's going to be a positive number, right? Because when we're talking about distance between something, we refer to that as a positive number. So all of our absolute values, our numbers, are going to be positive because we're talking about the distance between the number and 0 on the number line. So let me go ahead and draw a number line for you and go through a couple absolute values and how we can go ahead and answer those. Right, so there's these 5 answers or questions that we're going to go through. So we're going to find the absolute value of negative 5. So from negative 5, we need to see, well, how far away is negative 5 from 0? Because that's what we're answering. Well, our distance is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units away. And it's always going to be positive because we deal with our distance as a positive. So our answer of the absolute value of negative 5 is equal to a positive 5. Right, when we go ahead and solve for this question B from 4, well, how many units away from 0 are we? We're still 1, 2, 3, 4 units away. We're going to be saying when we're dealing with distance, we're always talking about it as a positive number, so that the absolute value of a positive 4 is positive 4. When we go to our next one here, we have the absolute value of negative 2. Well, here we are 2 units away from 0, so the absolute value of negative 2 is equal to a positive 2. All right, our next one that we will do is the absolute value of 3. I know I'm going through these kind of quickly, but hopefully you can catch on to what these answers are. So the absolute value of positive 3, well, we're 1, 2, 3 units away from 0. So the absolute value of positive 3 is 3. So you see, no matter what, when we take the absolute value of that number, it is going to give us a positive answer in return. So it's really easy. Whenever you are going ahead and actually answering these questions, it's just taking the positive of the number. So if we're finding the absolute value of any number, it's just going to be the positive of it. Now, 0 is a neutral number. It's not positive or negative. But if we're asking what's the absolute value of 0, well, how far away is 0 from 0? It is 0. So the absolute value of 0 is 0. So we don't write any positive sign there or anything like that because 0 is just a neutral number anyway. But when we're dealing with the absolute value of the numbers, it's just really easy. If it's a negative number, we're taking the positive as the answer. If it's a positive number, it's just that number as our answer. All right, and that is it for this video.